Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome. I'm your host, Mark Bain, CEO of the KYB, an organisation that uncovers businesses and ultimate beneficial owners across the globe. This session was good to be an interesting, insightful discussion covering cyber-enabled fraud and the impacts on AML. We'll also cover the rise of pig butchering scams and how money laundering laws can stop such cyber crimes, touching on the clash between privacy laws and fraud prevention, the challenges from underground money laundering services, and am I going to bring this to life? I don't think so. I've got some distinguished guests to do that for us, and I'd first like to introduce up on the stage, if there is such a stage, well, he is standing up. So Luke, welcome, Luke. Luke is an experienced anti-fraud crime professional, having worked in global banks and fintechs for the last 15 years, such as Square, Airwallex and Wise. As an experienced MLRO and regular speaker at most of these type of events, Luke is a subject matter expert and, as he says, a self-confessed nerd, which I'm sure may come apparent later, in areas anti-money laundering, fraud prevention, sanctions, PEPs, screening, and anti-bribery and corruption. What a lot to do there, Luke. Thank you. And next up on the stage, we have Kennedy Meader. Kennedy has over a decade of experience unraveling complex financial crimes in top-tier institutions, tackling issues like money laundering, drug financing, human trafficking. She's transitioned to the US Securities and Exchange Commission as a marketing intelligence fraud analyst, focusing on cases involving wash trading, money crossing, insider trading, money muling, and pump and dump schemes. Currently, Kennedy is a director of digital safety and fraud solutions at Scientific and helping financial institutions and business migrate fraud risks and build trust. Welcome, Kennedy. And last but no means least, we have Sanjay. Sanjay, currently the global head of cybersecurity and fraud solutions at Scientific, has over 17 years of financial services combating bad actors, and I like them words, bad actors across the globe, leading teams of engineered analysis and data scientists in the general generative artificial intelligence, which we'll come on to a little bit in a minute. And his fraud experiences include account takeover, AML, bot management, chargebacks, first party and forensic friendly fraud, and payments. Well, welcome to you all. Can you all give us a wave to the audience? Thank you. So, real pleasure to have you on board. We're going to dive straight into some of the questions that relate to some of the subject matters around the cyber fraud, and particularly we're going to start off with a question that, this term that's been mashed together, I'd like to say, the now term of Browells, if you like it. It sounds like some cuddly toy you might give your child, but for the benefit of the listeners, could one of you, maybe Kennedy or Luke, could give me an explanation of what the term means and how you think the consolidating or not, as the case may be, of these two things together can help combat crime for institutions.
Ladies first, Kennedy.
Thank you, Luke. So my overall understanding of Browells combining fraud and AML together into one, I guess, overall solution, I would maybe want to say. But I think my view on Browells within itself is a bit more on the strongly disagree side. I think fraud and AML are two separate disciplines. I think it takes two separate techniques. And there are two separate goals when it comes to fraud and AML within itself. Just understanding what fraud is, the attempt to, I guess, obtain funds or services or even property illicitly versus AML attempting to disguise or hide the attainment of those illicit funds. So I just think I don't agree with combining two separate disciplines into one. I do believe in a collaboration, just not combining them together. So, Luke.
Yeah, I strongly agree. So if you're hoping for pushback on the panel, no, not on this question. Look, fraud and AML are related. Sure, that's true. They both fall broadly under the financial crime umbrella. And so because fraud's taken off recently, what we've had is consultants and thought leaders, such as they are, emerge and say, hey, let's shove these things together. It's an unholy union, I'll tell you. It's not, it doesn't belong together operationally. It's kind of like saying, you know what, emergency services, police, fire, ambulance, they all happen when you dial 911 or another number if you're not in America. So let's just shove them all together. You know, just because they're all sort of broadly related, it doesn't mean that you can just have one person doing one thing in an organization. And the other thing that people love to talk about because it's trendy is breaking down silos. Have you ever been to a grain farm? You need silos, okay? Sometimes silos prevent there from being a massive mess everywhere. What you need is your AML team and your fraud team understanding one another, talking to one another, handing things off appropriately, but only then. They don't need to be one and the same. And in fact, I'd posit that it's an incredibly inefficient way of running a business.
Completely agree.
Very good. Sanjay, have you got anything to add in that your pearls of wisdom from the Fremmel? Is it a term that you use? Trips off the lips. It certainly doesn't trip off mine.
I would say not so much a term to use, but when I think of just Fremmel, I'm thinking of the last three letters, but just maybe slightly a modification, at least in my books. I'm thinking more from from machine learning, artificial intelligence, if you will. So when I look at anti-money laundering or any potential fraud-like schemes, really more so how is AI or generative AI either combating it or understanding it, right? What can we utilize? Where can generative AI actually be useful? But in the same token, with the advent of generative AI within the last couple of years, it's also now going to be attributing to net new, more vulnerabilities, that we're going to have to be on the lookout for. So is generative AI really accelerating the pace now for helping your bad actors, and maybe increasing the velocity of AML or increasing the velocity of fraud? At times, that's pretty much where my mind is at, and kind of the things that we think about, within our organization.
Yeah. So you see the term and you've broke it down in half already. So you might as well stay apart. So
Right.
that's what I get. That's what I get from your comment.
And to touch off of Sanjay, even with utilizing AI to help, I guess, combat it. I mean, with fraud detection, you have to kind of act fast. You're looking at unusual patterns, alerts firing versus AMLs, more of elongated investigation, possible structuring or whatnot. So it's like, I think my question leans into how would we even utilize AI to investigate, or not investigate, but fire off or mitigate something that's two separate things, even from the alert aspect. So
yeah, good point. This doesn't really segue. My next question doesn't really segue into this, but just bear with me because I perhaps didn't put it in the right order. But we're going to be talking around now social media. So looking at some of the most popular media platforms, it's quoted that 30% of all money mules are falling in the under the age of 21, with over 50% of which are often cash-strapped students. These are quotes from Barclays Bank, particularly out of the UK. So the question sort of lies around social media as one of the major facilitators of fraud and recruitment of money mules. Tick. Do you think that due diligence laws should apply on social networking websites as well as other places? So I think you might have some strong views around this, Kennedy.
I was going to let Luke have this one first since he gave me.
Oh, yeah.
Reverse story. Oh, okay. Look, yeah, I do. It may not be, as so often when we look at different industries with the same problems and regulations across them, it may not be a like-for-like transplant. It may not be that we drag and drop KYC and providing all your documents, etc., to a social media company. I do think that due diligence is more than just knowing, more than identification, though, and we're going to get to this later in the session, I believe. that they need to be doing more. And when I talk about their obligations, or the obligations I think they should have, rather, it's a certain amount of knowing who they're dealing with, but it's more also detecting bad actors and then expediently removing them, putting in practical steps for people that have been scammed or misled on the platform, or extorted, which is happening in just drastic numbers and is very alarming. So there's a whole suite of obligations that I think it's not just like KYC, as in financial services. You could implement KYC, and it's like, so what? You know, it's the first step in a series of steps.
Yeah. I agree. I know that in the UK they passed the online safety bill that kind of touches on that to help prevent fraud or I guess scammers using the online platforms to target individuals using the platform. But also on the other side, there appears to be I guess a disagreement with that because it would impede on free speech. So, which makes me in the middle when it comes to it. I do agree with having social media is more regulated, and maybe passing a bill similar to the online safety bill that's going that was passed in the UK. I do agree with that, but I feel like I think maybe there should be more focus on the vulnerable. When it comes to that bill, not necessarily those who may not fit in the vulnerability category. I do believe in 100% free speech. My ideology is more of the just live with the consequences behind what you know what you say publicly or what you do, rather that be public shame or the justice system taken over. But I think I'm in the middle with it. I do agree with having again social media platforms more regulated. And more stringent when it comes to the vulnerable. But
I think it's less about like, I agree with you as well. And there's a trade-off here. Sorry, Sanjay, cut me off if you want to jump in. There's a trade-off involved here, but there's and we were talking about this before, Kenny. I think we're on the same page. There's free speech, and then there's committing fraud or extorting someone or threatening someone. Those are a bar above, and so I think it is a really good point though, because you need to delineate free speech from stopping crime and bad actors,
right.
and criminality is not protected by free speech, which we all understand. But what you would immediately run into criticisms of is things like, well, what constitutes a fraud or a scam, what constitutes misinformation, for instance, that gets a very slippery slope very quickly. And I think this is the year of elections around the world. So I totally take your point. It's a contentious trade-off, especially in I think, Kennedy, you're coming to us from the States today. So especially in some countries. Yeah, right.
No, I completely agree. I think when it comes to social media, it's kind of difficult to tell people to be adults on social media and cross-reference what they read. It's easy to say that, So I do understand a level of Big Brother that may need to be implemented for people using the platform. But then again, like I said, the vulnerable, that's a little different. There needs to be a lot more responsibility on the social media platforms for that group in particular, in my opinion.
I would, if I were to lean in from a tech perspective, because I can't resist, for each and every topic, right? I do think very avidly as it relates to AI, especially when it comes to this specific question and social media. So the deep fakes, if you will, immediately come to my mind. And as we speak about, is social media fueling? I mean, we could say, well, even before social media, we have this thing called the internet, right? Which we are all utilizing. So as technology evolves, so will the mechanisms that bad actors are going to continue to utilize. So if we look at social media, and if you will, creating a fake profile, along with the fake profile, right, the fake persona, potentially utilizing that profile and merging it with like a synthetic ID, right? Where now you've got real credentials, to so to speak. However, there's a fake profile related to that. Now, using a combination of these two, courtesy of your social media or your social networking site, to either portray and transact, I think there's pros and cons, is what I think. The pros that I think are, we're democratizing everything, regardless of which geography that we're in, and legislation is always going to be in a catch-up game. The moment something net new is introduced, just like here, I think of the White House's AI Bill of Rights.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, good, bad, indifferent, just like the so-called pandemic, something has been unleashed, that something has happened to be beyond the internet. Right now, it's more so courtesy of artificial intelligence. We may have avatars that are now going to be maybe even transacting for us, right? Perhaps when we talk about the social media or networking, it's the avatar, right? We've already defined that. Maybe we no longer have 10 years from now or 5 years from now, it's not really our face, but it is now AI generated, and it's related to now who we are, and it represents a persona. It may not exactly be, when we call photo edited, but at the end of the day, it's something that's still there. It's still going to be a mechanism, for us to interact, and it still will be a medium to be able to perform, transact, communicate. Again, good, bad, indifferent. It's unleashed. It's really more so how do we maneuver, how do we contain, how do we isolate, or maybe more so how do we mitigate any of the.
Yeah. So Sanjay, I'm thinking around that last part of that question, because everything you just raised is a real hot topic, particularly around deep fakes. Now, one of the aspects could be around this. Do you think that due diligence laws should apply to social networking websites? Let's just think of this scenario that I've set up a site where I'm trying to recruit a mule, and do you think, like years ago, I think it's still there, they call it Speaker's Corner in London in Hyde Park. When you stand up on that soapbox and you make that speech about whatever you want to talk about, it's freedom of speech, but it's you making that talk. So in this case, do you think actually due diligence should be in place to say, okay, you can say what you like online, you can do what you like, but you've got to know it's you. So to do that, you've got to go through these checks. That, to me, would be the best scenario, but I don't know what your thoughts are on that, guys.
I would agree. So there is a lot of introductions of watermarks, if you will. So we're talking about watermarking content. So even though we may mention freedom of speech, first and foremost is watermarking it in terms of the authenticity of the original author. Because now when we say original author in 2024, or if you will 2034, what will real actually be? Right? Who will be the real author at any given point in time, moving forward? So I think there's a combination of things, especially from a cybersecurity and AI perspective. One is watermark, the concept of that, again, authenticity. I think that there must be even stronger perimeters. When we talk about cybersecurity or architecture, the perimeters I'm referencing is really verifying who a person or who an entity or what an entity is. Because just like today, we're all have been overwhelmed, I don't know, maybe over the past decade with social networking sites. But now, what is to say that in the next decade, what we know of today, where we have our profile again and a real photo image of us, why cannot that be substituted by a deep fake that we've approved? So to answer your question, what if we as authors, right, of content, or if you will, that freedom of speech, if we happen to be the originators, but if we've given the approval, right, we've given the authority to have an avatar represent who we are, and now that avatar is performing that freedom of speech on our behalf, if you will. And I hate to introduce or intermingle concepts around blockchain here, but I think that concept needs to be more vetted moving forward. I will pause. I can keep going on and on, but
Yeah,
I'll welcome
I can tell.
Oh, preaching to the choir. I agree.
Yeah. I'm going to segue into another conversation here because it kind of then bruises to it be a single thing. And given actually the diverse amount of fraud and money laundering parts, if you like, moving parts and different aspects of it, do you honestly think that there could potentially be a single integrated organization worldwide that could tackle the fraud of money laundering and any adverse crime cyber threats?
I agree. No, no. Considering,
so that's it, no.
Yeah, I think I believe it was IBM. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyone watching, but the report was stating that 80% or maybe over 80% of data breaches were due to human error. So if you combine that with the second highest being internal threats, malicious internal threats, and then the increase of bad actors on the dark web actually recruiting, insiders specifically, I don't see how there could be a one single system. If you then also include that mitigating insider threats is a lot harder than external. So how could there be a one single system to fight when it's already difficult to monitor internal threats as it is, if that makes sense?
If I could maybe expand upon that from that single system, if you will. I think right there lies a bit of a fallacy, if you will, right? I don't think I think it's nirvana to think that there is a single system that can actually govern. I think there really is what's known as micro segmentation. So if I look at, again, leading back to the concepts pertaining to cybersecurity or zero trust, the concept of micro segmentation or isolation is you're going to you will self-contain application systems that have either a combination of data or the applications that are not utilizing the data for either usage, creating, storing, or processing, transacting. Each and every one of those that I just mentioned, the application's data, they each need to be self-contained in their own, if you will, environments, in their own networks, virtual networks, supported on top, or I should say, yes, on top with virtual machines, containers, etc. The point I'm trying to make here is that having a notion of a single system, I think that's gone, or those days, unfortunately, but still they exist. So we've got a little bit of a balancing act here, is that we've got many organizations, if you will, across the world, regardless of industry, that are either net new, completely cloud native systems and applications, or somewhere in between, or maybe privatized networks. Or we also have something which still exists today, something which people still designate or know as the mainframe. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this, right, is that if I were to go back decades ago and say, well, threats, fraud, cybersecurity, issues such as these have been spanning as every shift that we've had with technology evolution. However, when I go back to the origination, I go back to the mainframe, and I think, were we better then? Were we safer then? I would stick my neck out there and say, yes, I do think we were. That doesn't mean that, that we cannot be safer today. It's just, I think we've got to have many different layers, many different levels for governance and security to ensure that, we are watching what transactions are occurring. We're able to hopefully introduce, additional mechanisms to be able to catch fraud or to be able to catch any kind of schemes that may be happening.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Luke, you've probably got
Sorry, you just have to look at the conversation we've had so far. There can't be one system that encompasses all of this, because the good guys have to comply with laws, and there's a million people with varying degrees of tinfoil on their head that don't necessarily want everything to be regulated and to have full information sharing. Any system is as good as its inputs, right? And one benefit that bad guys have over two benefits really, but one benefit is that they're innovators, right? We're responders. There's always a first mover advantage. We catch up. I think Sanjay said earlier, like regulation lag risk, right? That's true. So we're always responding, and they're innovating, and I think that's a really important point. They get to play an experiment. We get to respond, and we have to comply with laws, and they don't. So we're talking about like, oh, should we regulate social media companies? That's the best possible companies on earth, Silicon Valley tech bros, to tackle this problem, but they are too busy trying to break into one another's algorithms and acquire new customers and sell me a new Keep Cup for my coffees in Melbourne here in Australia. It's like they don't want to. And until we solve for that, like a unified system is a lovely idea, but we're not unified.
I agree. And I want to add too that at the end of the day, everyone is just human. So you can have this amazing system. It's not going to mitigate fraud at all, honestly, because you can never get rid of it, because at the end of the day, people are just human. They're going to send their transaction if they're getting scammed. They're not may not protect their account. There's nothing
you can turn off the whole internet, and all that'll happen is that fraud will transform again, and people will be selling one another bridges. I mean, just like they used to, right?
Yeah, exactly right. It kind of sort of segues me into another subject which we were touched on earlier, but I think there's a similar answer about one kind of almost like I'm feeling what you're about to say is about sharing data and about preventing that. But this particular scam is often an embarrassing and hidden scam. We talked about the vulnerable before, and if any of the audience have not seen the YouTube clip by Jim Browning, it's definitely worth a look. Rise of pig butchering scams, which is a honey trap starting point. Often sophisticated cybercrime. This compounds often in the Southeast Asia. Really, the question is, how do we think anti-money laundering laws can help prevent cyber-enabled frauds in the first place, which is a big topic, but we'll touch on this. So I don't know who wants to take this deep question first.
Yeah, I have strong views on this. I'm happy to
Go
pick
for
it up. Look, Kennedy kind of got at it in the very beginning, where she talked about Framel, and the reason that Framel doesn't work is that AML is, by its very nature, we're sort of wait and see. We sit back, and that's why I have this glorious beard, so I can stroke it while I'm thinking. Whereas fraud people are like bang, bang, bang. And reactive. The problem with but like immediately, right? Immediately reactive. And so I think we're much better at stopping fraud as a generally as a discipline. We're much better at fraud than we are at AML in the world, and there's two reasons for that. One is fraud largely relies on getting authentic signals from the customer. We can call the customer and ask them. We can't actually call a money launderer and ask them if they're a money launderer. And the other is that fraud represents an inherent motivation, I suppose, and yet that for a business to do a really good job. Even Facebook has fraud controls, and they don't do enough. I'm just going to call them out. I'll probably get kicked off the platform after this meeting, but if they don't do enough for stopping fraud and scams against themselves, against one another, against their users, but they have strong fraud controls themselves. I guarantee it. Otherwise, they would lose all their money to fraud. With AML and anti-money laundering regulations, and the financial institutions, there's an inherent conflict at the heart there, because it's money laundering that happens in the forest, and no one's around to see that tree fall. Did it even happen? And how does it reflect on that entity's profit line? It's not a loss like fraud that you don't detect. It's a benefit. All of this long rant to tie it back to pig butchering. The problem is that we've got fraud and money laundering happening en masse at the same time, and we need to get better at interrupting and taking that fraud lens without using stupid acronyms like AML But taking that fraud lens and applying it to money and saying, let's disrupt those financial flows, because it's an acquisitive crime. The reason that there's 200,000 odd slaves in captivity, I would say it's much higher, but that's one of the sort of public figures that they're saying about. And for everyone's understanding, these are slaves in compounds in atrocious conditions being tortured and murdered in third world countries and targeting our citizens. And as you said, they're scamming them out of much money. The reason for this is that we're bad at stopping those illicit financial flows. And just to get back to the inherent conflict at the heart of it, I've spoken to way too many scam victims, right? It's heartbreaking stuff. I spoke to one. He was in the States, and he was being what's known as sextorted. So it's not quite pig butchering, but it's very similar modus operandi in that it's quite able to be identified up front that, oh, hey, this looks like it could be this guy suffering from a scam. And he ended up paying, I think he lost about $20,000. I talked to him because he was frantic on the internet trying to get help from anybody. And the appalling thing for me was the money laundering detection processes of something like 5 firms had correctly identified that he was being scammed. They had declined to participate in the transaction because that mitigates their risk, and they offered him no resources, no support, no help. They just said no and get out because you're a risk. So there's no necessary. Unfortunately, when I said before, we're not a unified system. We need to incentivize capitalism to solve this big problem. Otherwise, everyone tries to outrun the bear. You know the story in the forest of the 2 runners, and they encounter the bear, and one starts lacing up their runners and says, I don't need to outrun the bear. I just need to outrun you. That's kind of how we deal with this at the moment. And it's a big problem, and I've talked for way longer than I should have. Does anyone else have a view on this?
I think I agree. I think I agree. Yeah, I'm just gonna sit with that. I agree. My opinions don't seem to be popular, so I think I'm just gonna say I agree for the most part. Yeah,
we can follow the money, right? Like that's great. I love this. That's why I'm rocking this shirt. AML is follow the money, but if we don't stop it, then the scams will continue. And so AML regulation can have a massive impact on pig butchering, as can regulating social media platforms where 80% of these originate. But only if we move towards that fraud mindset of, hey, let's stop this and give that customer help. And that's what I agree. Yeah.
I actually agree with that, having more of a fraud mindset, because it's like the quick acting, reactive, maybe trying to go into a stopping fraud before, I guess, happens. But I do like the idea of being more on having a fraud mindset as a whole.
Yeah, mitigate the crime as opposed to our risk, like actually give that poor guy that got scammed $20,000 and was frantic help and resources, and tell him, hey, listen, mate, they're not going to do anything. Just don't pay them. Like, that's all they needed to hear.
Right.
But instead everyone sort of said, no.
Yeah. Right. And I think we run into the problem too of, aside from those who are, on the vulnerability side, I think the problem then lies into, when does liability become a part of the conversation for the consumer? Did you make the conscious effort to maybe, as you were saying, scams, hang up the phone and call the number on the back of your card? Or, and some people may be frazzled in a situation where they, just get a call, but then you kind of get into that slippery slope of consumer liability,
I don't think we intended to go there, but let's go. That's my favorite topic, because I think that it's just so ripe for exploitation by fraudsters. It's an example of something that sounds like it's going to solve the problem, and it will for 5 seconds, until they adapt and say, oh, wait, we can defraud way more now by pretending to be victims of fraud.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think there's answer or solution.
Slightly off topic, but
perfect.
Yeah, but I think we covered it. We're going to, I think this is probably Sanjay's favorite subject, so he's going to be pitching in a second. So with the ever-increasing presence of AI, machine learning, I like to think, well, it helps everyone, but does it? There's a lovely saying that when the tide comes in, all boats rise. Well, some of them boats are not so nice, and some are good boats. So we've got a little poll here for the audience to participate. So I think if you believe in this AI-enabled AML compliance poses a risk to cyber-enabled fraud, strongly agree, disagree, and everything in between. You will let the audience, whilst they're pitching that, we'll put the question out there. So, does this? What's your thoughts on this, Sanjay? Because I think you're primed up, ready to go on this subject. I know you are.
Yes. I would 50-50. So the 50-50 is yes and no. So yes, we have enabled, if you will, or AI has enabled for a greater velocity, if you will, many more incidences, if you will. However, I'd have to step back and say, well, was it really AI that has introduced that, or do we go back decades, the predecessor, and we just think about just technology in general? Which one is it? So when I'm mentioning the 50-50, it's not so much that I'm a firm believer that AI has enabled it. I think that AI has given a mechanism, right, that's being exploited, and how, just like the topics related to privacy, and when we speak about our social networking sites, how do we choose to govern either as citizens or govern with the usage with our children, depending upon age. The governance factor, I think, plays a significant role. So I don't believe that AI is necessarily enabling all of these net new mechanisms. I think it's just really more so a foundation of how we are evolving, how technology has evolved, how we're utilizing technology. We would all like to, have some form of scapegoat, if you will, or some entity that we can say, well, it's because of that we are experiencing a high volume of either fraud or any money laundering. But is it really that, or is it really more so how we have evolved from our own thinking, right? If I go back to Neanderthal man versus today, are we much different than that? Maybe not. Again, just my take on this. How we choose to utilize technology, I think, really should rely upon us. So while AI, many folks may have that perspective that it's enabling it, we're also utilizing artificial intelligence to combat. So it's fire fighting fire, to so to speak. So as we see something like such as a deep fake, are we not able to recognize it? It may not be that discernible, to the human eye, just like the anti-money laundering, or if you will, money laundering schemes, or the pig butchering that we were speaking about before. Just because we haven't recognized it doesn't mean it's not there, right? So, and I think that artificial intelligence is giving us mechanisms. It's giving the enablement to, at scale, at speed, detect different types of either patterns or recognize relationships that we normally would not be able to fathom. And I think I'm leaning more so on the utilization of artificial intelligence to identify, to recognize, to formulate patterns as more of a benefactor versus, well, it's an enabler and it's actually accelerating fraud from happening, or giving a easier mechanism of a greater facilitator for your bad actors.
Yeah, Kennedy, I think you have some. Oh, sorry, Luke. Go on.
No, that's all right. You're right. Give Kennedy.
No. You just.
No, go ahead, Luke.
All right. Well, it's just, with the idea of a rising tide lifts all boats, it's a question of whether it's more marginal utility for bad guys and good guys, right? It's like saying, did handguns help cops or robbers more? it's a bit hard. And as you said, Sanjay, we have to fight fire with fire. One thing I will say, as a bit of a professional AI cynic, so not invited to Sanjay's after event drinks, I don't think. But well may we say that a rising tide lifts all boats. I say when the tide goes out, you see who's been swimming naked. A lot of talk at the moment about AI solving the world's problems, and I think Sanjay gave a really balanced answer actually. But it's just talk at the moment. Fraudsters are using it better than us. So at the moment, there's no doubt about it. And I think it comes down to some of that thing around governance, and we are governed by laws, and we need to have like full explainability for AI models, and we're concerned about privacy, and in certain sections of the world you're not even allowed to use generative AI, or there's stricter regulations, and we've got GDPR in certain areas of the world, and you've got your free speech and everything all muddled in there. Fraudsters don't care. They're just doing it. I think just treat anyone that's saying that they're using AI at scale to like tremendously take the fight to fraudsters, take that with a pinch of salt would be all
I agree with that. I agree. And I will say, when it comes to that as well, fraudsters do have the upper hand because it's more unified. At the end of the day, it does not matter what they're trying to do. The end goal, is to commit fraud. There's no unity when it comes to organizations, in my humble opinion. There's no unity, especially when you have, like I said earlier, 80% of the data breach is related to human error. But when that human error is done, they're not. Employees don't feel comfortable to even state that there was an error that was made. Which would then lead to fraud-related activities with the data that was actually leaked or whatnot. So I think there's just no unity, to the point where if someone's just not comfortable saying that, hey, I accidentally clicked on XYZ, maybe we should tighten up just in case something happens. But if that makes sense. But yeah.
Yeah, I think you answered that very well. One thing I would just add into that is that obviously AI is made up, and machine learning is made up of data sets. And they learn those data sets, and you've absolutely, I believe in exactly what you just said. The data set that a bad actor wants to create, they don't care. Once it's learned it, they keep doing it. Whereas we're governed by some kind of regulation or law effectively to that. So that does pose. So I think the question is, I suppose it does pose a little bit of a risk to us. They're always going to be one step ahead, as we know. So, and talking about the safety part and about the privacy part is brings us on quite neatly to the next questions around. You mentioned it, Luke. GDPR in parts of the world, privacy. Well, and we talked about the open bill, the open safety bill in the UK that the Parliament passed. Well, there are some rights groups, could believe it or not, that oppose this because they feel like it's threatening our privacy and undermining freedom of expression and likes. So the question really is, how does data privacy and protection laws are in conflict with anti-fraud and anti-money laundering compliance measures?
I'm cognizant that I keep jumping in.
Who would like to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to, but I'm cognizant that I keep hogging the microphone. So I'm happy to sit this one out.
Yeah.
Until it's passed to me.
I could touch on the just. I know when it comes to data privacy laws, it's more on the it's less data, limited retention when it comes to that versus AML. It's large amounts of data and elongated retention of that data to help facilitate with investigations. So I think that's what the conflict is. Now, I do believe, when it comes to federal or local, whatever investigations relating to fraud or AML or anything illicit, you no longer have the right to your data privacy, and just in my opinion, when it comes to that.
Yeah.
So I'll hand it over to Luke. That's just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, unsurprisingly, I agree. I'm always cognizant though that I'm not the I'm not probably a representative person to ask, right? Because I wear t-shirts about this stuff. Like, I care deeply about this fight. And I think that it's a sliding scale and there's friction. So you got your privacy and your AML, right? And it's like full privacy means no KYC, just abolish AML laws. Everybody has totally non-compliant by current standards, but free private information, you may as well abolish AML altogether if you try to go for that level of the scale. Then the other end of the scale is essentially what people freak out about with like central bank digital currencies and they believe that KYC is itself, which is fairly non-contentious, but they think that that's like some sort of tremendous overreach, and that they really are entitled to their financial privacy. I am a freak at the other one end of the scale, and so I acknowledge that most people are not at the end of the scale that I'm at. And the scale that I'm at is, I would throw my financial affairs absolutely open to the whole entire world. Every single transaction I would gladly share with the government. Kennedy, I can probably feel you shaking. Because that's the ultimate. We talked about the information flows informing decisions. That's the ultimate for AML. And yes, it is open to abuse, and I'm happy to accept that. That there's a trade-off there, and I have multiple other canaries in the coal mine, shall we say, for a free democratic society than my payments. You don't necessarily start world domination by instituting strong AML laws. Yes, they're free for abuse, but we have several steps along the way before we get. You don't just go, full AML, not that much financial privacy, more transparency, immediately autocracy. It doesn't work that way. So I'm okay with that. Most people aren't, though. Most people, there's a balance, right? Unfortunately, AML and politics go hand in hand. We rely.
I agree with that completely.
We rely on people, the electorate, giving them a mandate, most of them aren't like up one complete end. So I think that the answer has to lie somewhere in the middle. But to your original point, there is massive friction between these.
Right.
Both very important things to different people, right?
Right. And even if you look at what happened with COVID, all of the disbursements that were related to fraud, the amount of fraud that happened during COVID, if the government doesn't even have systems to or adequate systems to, dictate if someone is deceased and they're getting triple, COVID disbursements, I really don't 100% trust the government with my data.
Fair enough. Like, it's a conflict, right? And you can't say one view is right. It's just we all have to come up with this beautiful situation where we're all a little bit unhappy.
Exactly.
But I suppose, just jumping in there, I suppose it sort of plays to the AML Watch's part of sanction and PEPs and uncovering bad actors, should they be there, or not necessarily the bad actors, but if they're on a list somewhere, is it their relatives that are on the list? Are they hiding behind that? Is that privacy? I don't know. Yep. And part of what the KYB does fundamentally is uncovering the ultimate beneficial owner in a shell scheme complex organization. Again, is there privacy? Should there be privacy in an organization like that? It's a big question.
This is another one that I'd love to just quickly comment on the privacy and the protection. My view, I guess, it is that I think this is a healthy conflict, and I think it's a necessity. Maybe it is a necessary evil for this conflict to be introduced, and here's why. So when I think about data privacy and protection laws, obviously if I go all the way back to our conversation earlier today in terms of social networking sites, even the devices that we're utilizing, whether it happens to be a specific account, via that account, and you're using your mobile device through that interaction, maybe you're performing some form of a transaction, if you will. Your identity information is being captured. The device you're using is being tracked. I think that these are necessary, and whether we view privacy as a watcher, if you will, so to speak, and the watcher that I'm referencing and the privacy that I'm referencing would be first name, last name, your device ID, which browser is it, how long, what's the duration, of your session on that device, utilizing that browser. I think that those are necessary to then be able to comprehend and do a compare and contrast against predefined or known patterns at a given point in time related to money laundering or related to any form of fraudulent schemes. I think that the privacy. I think privacy is another nirvana. I don't think privacy really exists in any. Maybe it did at some point in time, but today I don't think there is. I don't think that they're having a right of privacy and having protection hand in hand. There in itself is also, I think, a conflict of interest. So my views, I would lean in again, focus more so on utilizing technology heavily. And if I can just quickly give a couple of examples here, some of the things that I actually enjoy and solutions that I admire are those that take into consideration a fair amount of what's known as DLP and the GRC. The DLP, data loss prevention; GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. So when I think about data loss prevention and data privacy, when we talk about organizations, we talk about enterprises. Literally, it's capturing, it's understanding, it's monitoring what data is actually being utilized. You have to opt in. So just like how we were talking about social networking sites, do you permit your 10-year-old or 18-year-old, or if you will, 17-year-old? Are you permitting them, usage time, for a specific social networking site? Yes, you are. So where are the boundaries related to privacy, and how can you really protect? So if I were to look at examples here, things that I again admire, or some of the things that I think Microsoft as an organization, tools that they've introduced, like this thing called Purview, even OpenAI. When we talk about using AI to fight other bad actors' usages of AI, I think all of these things kind of go hand in hand. Again, back to understanding the entity that's performing something, the activity and the behavior related, and based off of the activity and monitoring that, coming up with a decision to say, is this potentially fraudulent? Is this potentially, contributing to a money laundering scheme, per se? I think there's still that catch-up game with compliance. So I think this is a healthy balance, right? And I think that conflict should exist. If anything else, I think the conflict needs to be doubled. We need to increase that, because if we don't do that, we will not have legislation.
So Sanjay, I think what you're talking around here is my next question that I've got posed, and I'm quite conscious of our timekeeping, because we've got some questions from the our immense audience from around the world, all chewing at the bit to ask questions to us. But I've got one final question, which really I think, Sanjay, you were talking to at this point. It's about account takeover, mail identity theft, synthetic identity theft. You know the list. It's huge. So identity theft is the most common enemy when it comes to fraud and money laundering. I suppose what you kind of touched on it. What strategies should institutions adopt to try and tackle it?
I think first and foremost is what's known as identity perimeters. So when we talk about identity or synthetic identities, one of the things that I am personally a proponent of, and I do think that this again is a necessity, is the digital ID, if you will. So when I look here in the States, there are now 9 states. New York was one of the latest, most recent, to now go live mobile. Within it's the mobile, if you will, government issued ID, your driver's license. There's 9 states, I believe, as of today, that have already adopted that practice. The reason I'm giving this example is that when it comes to now identity theft, we've got to, I think, go all the way back to the source. Is where have you now persisted or stored that identity? Is it is by identity? Are we talking about who you are or what you represent as a persona on a social network site? Is it the government issued ID that's talking about, or if you will, documents, first name, last name, your residence? Is it the government issued ID, again, here in the United States, your social security, number? I think the concept of ID is more federated, versus what it used to be. It's no longer just your first name and last name. It's your Twitter handle, if you will, right? It's your, or I should say your X handle, right? It's really more so who and what we are. So by governing, having specific control mechanisms in place at an identity perimeter level, and then leading all the way in to any given infrastructure, applications, data, having different sorts of access control mechanisms like your MFAs, When we talk about cloud infrastructures, it's having these access security brokers, being able to monitor, being able to capture, seeing these specific patterns to say, are these specific, transactions, activities, are they representative of potentially fraud? Are they representative of potential money laundering? These are the strategies I believe that institutions, again, need to adopt, which is, again, at the most edge, if we will, the edge being from identity, regardless of source, validate that through different identity verification mechanisms, and then all the way in terms of that multi-factor, in terms of security access brokers within your cloud infrastructure, governance, your GRC, and DLP, which is your data loss prevention.
Yeah.
Mouthful.
Absolutely. I'm conscious of time. If anyone wants got to add a little bit to that, we've got a few questions coming up from
2 seconds.
the
2
audience.
seconds. Sanjay's
Go
talking
on,
about.
Luke.
I can't help myself. I'm sorry. Sanjay's talking about bleeding edge stuff, the future. Sure. Right now, though, you don't have to go to the bleeding edge because you could say it's, too far out there. But you can really effectively mitigate the risks of identity theft with cutting edge, just stuff that's a little ahead of the curve. Things like biometric matching. I can't hold up, if I steal Sanjay's wallet and you have biometric matching, I can hold up his valid ID and it'll say,
Right.
like, oh, that doesn't look right. And behavioral analytics are really, really helpful. You can tell things with some really sophisticated vendors these days, risk signals about nervousness or the fact that they're copying and pasting a date of birth instead of entering their date of birth, which isn't something a human does. There's all sorts of stuff like that as well.
So you're referring to bot detection, maybe.
Well, bot and
detection.
not you, right? Like you Kennedy shouldn't be
Right.
able to come to Australia and open an account by holding up my driver's license, right?
Oh, I see what you're talking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to cut you a little bit there because I'm going to got some questions come in. So this is a question in from Ben McBean. There's the question in front of me. Look at that. I'm trying to read it on a smaller screen. So as a comparison, should police stop any confidence fraudster from approaching, for the people in the street to elicit money? Is that freedom
This is a
of
Kennedy
speech?
question. Kennedy,
Yeah.
go for it.
Let me hear his point. What is the difference
I'll quickly jump in.
he has a point. I mean, if you're committing a crime, you should stop the crime. I do agree with Luke what you said prior to when we went live. You can't yell fire in a building. This is a fire in the building type of situation. So I actually agree with that. I agree. I guess you can say I believe in freedom of speech overall. But like I said before, if the consequences is you getting arrested, that's your consequence. I
have a quick response. I got to say, prioritization, right? So when we talk about police, right, and if there's prioritization of this incident is happening at the same time that there's a burning building or something, and a law enforcement officer needs to make a decision, I think for this question, I like the question, but I think this is it depends. Right? It's all in context, based on prioritization, as well as based on risk, right? Because if this person who happens to be now approaching people, how
does he have a weapon?
Possible, right? So what's the safety factor, right, of doing that? And is this person, is this a known entity? And what is to say that this person is doing this illegally? What if, it happens to be, there is a real, there's a real need related to this, and it's genuine, right? It's not so much that this person happens to be a fraudster, or a bad actor. I think it's predetermined information. I think it depends.
And also, how do we know it's a fraudster? I think that's my next question. What does a fraudster actually look like per se? And with the rise of social media, is this a prank? Nowadays, with my generation, everything is a prank. So I don't really know.
Let's be honest. He's not going to be wearing orange, or he's not going to be wearing arrows on his shirt, is he?
Right.
It's not that obvious. So thanks. Hopefully, Ben, that you've got something from that. We've got a little question here from Louis. No, I can't read it. She's going to bring it up. There we go. You can read that. terrorist financing via Spotify. Okay, it's an interesting. Did he mean to write wild? That also falls under the fraud realm.
Yeah, I
Wood.
mean,
I think
yeah.
that's supposed to be wood.
Hi, Louis. We're connected on LinkedIn. I really like Louis. It's a good question. You can launder money and you can do terrorist financing and you can do fraud through everything, right? It doesn't mean we need to, create a typology report for it or anything along those lines. As I haven't seen anything about terrorist financing. I definitely saw something around money laundering where they were using Spotify. I think it was in the Netherlands, and yeah, it was fraud. Money laundering and fraud are related. You can't do one without the other. In this case, if you're listening to ISIS radio on Spotify to fund them, Spotify's got a big sanctions enforcement in the future coming for them, but you're committing fraud, I suppose. You're not really listening to like music, right? So, yeah.
Does that mean when I listen to my favorite tracks, I'm committing a fraud?
Yeah. No. Just joking.
We've got a couple more questions before we wrap up and look at the poll. There's one here from, and I'm not very good at pronouncing names, but I'm going to call you Sylvia, but because that's the nearest translation I can come to, and I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name. But given the most scams originate on social media, would it help if social media companies were held accountable? Well, we kind of went across that, isn't it, for allowing and facilitating them on the platforms in the first place, or require reimbursements? It's a long question. Is that feasible?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. You don't need to change the laws. You can prosecute them under proceeds of crime because they're accepting proceeds of crime in order to fund those ads. I think Kennedy mentioned earlier, they're benefiting. You can add them under, I think it's RICO or something in the States. I don't know. There's a lot of things that a creative DA could do. So, I wouldn't be sitting back as Zuckerberg and my, my throne and thinking that you're safe. The legislators are starting to take the fight to social media, and if they don't come to the table, they will be held accountable. Yep, and they should be.
Just a really quick, like 20 seconds. I feel like if they were treated kind of like Walmart, for example, a lot of the fraud that was going on, maybe I shouldn't drop the name of company, but Walmart, for example, and they were accused of facilitating fraud because they were allowing a lot of fraud to happen with through money. I think it was like MoneyGram or in person, making withdrawals and transfers, within their network, and they were still held accountable for that. So I think having that approach towards social media platforms as well, if you're allowing things to facilitate, held accountable for that.
I've got to.
Go on.
Sorry, 5 seconds. I have to say no. I don't think that they should be held accountable, honestly, because it's like, do we hold the internet accountable? I love the question. I think it's a great question. But do we hold the internet now accountable and responsible? Are we holding telecom organizations and companies accountable because they're providing a medium, a transport mechanism for us to basically even have this webinar today? Are we going to now hold them accountable? Should we now seek reimbursement losses for them? So I think, my stance, on this wouldn't necessarily, be social media companies themselves, but really more so, tighter legislation, regulation, right? More evolution related to technologies, so that the very same tools, the very mechanisms that you're going to give people to communicate, you're giving them, tools, democratizing, if you will, AI tools for the typical average citizen, for them to combat themselves, or if you will, being able to defend themselves.
Yeah, but citizens
are still making
against
money on the back end. That's the problem. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. Let's not for a second pretend that the significant resources in these companies couldn't do a lot more than they do. There's got to be a point where they've done enough, but they've got to do more than they're doing.
Right.
Yeah. They are making money at the end of the day.
Yeah, and they're making money, which is more distasteful too. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think we're going to go for a final question here, given the timeline, and then we'll look at the. So this is from I can't see Rajesh, and the question is generative AI enabling identity theft? We touched on that earlier, and making it easier for bad actors to create synthetic IDs.
That's a Sanjay question, if ever I heard
I
one.
would love to
definitely.
take this one.
Go on, Sanjay.
I would love it. Well, I think this one also, and I have to be Janice faced a bit. All right, this is gonna be yes and no. So yes, okay. I do believe that it is going to be making things easier. So there are GPT variants, courtesy of, if you will, your bad actors, right? You've got warm GPT, you have wolf GPT, you have fraud GPT. So I think for anything out there, there's always going to be, again, that bad actor thinking, how do I exploit? So is it making things easier? I think it's giving a mechanism, right? It's giving a platform to be able to do that. But in the same token, you're also able to use the same platform, same set of tools to also be able to detect, is this a synthetic ID? Now, I will not say that it's going to be 100% accurate, right? With the most, most up-to-date, if you will, efficiency. But I would say that there's a fair amount of accuracy to be able to detect, if you will, potentially synthetic IDs.
Yeah.
Long-winded.
Long-winded, but good. That wasn't that long, to be fair. That was quite short for you. Thanks, Sanjay. Fantastic. So I think my controller in the background is probably going to pop up this poll in a minute. I could be wrong. We'll see if she's going to bring up the poll as the results. It'll be interesting to see. If she doesn't, I may have one more question that's going to pop up, but she's just about to tell me now. So it's age of technology with 4 screens in my midst here. I don't know where to look first. So here we go. Oh no, there's one more. So she is popping up the last question. So Ben has got another question coming up, and this is around, and if you're aware, and I know a little bit about this myself. So there's such as Companies House, for example, has generated fake IDs. They're on a mission at the moment to clean it up, but this is ultimately due to poor systems. I think you could probably talk to this about, Luke. So understanding that you could register a company for 12 quid in the UK and there would be no checks. Your dead granny could be on it. That's part of the point. So
yeah, look, we're on a maturation journey, right? I think Companies House has done some stellar work in increasing that. I'm not quite sure the actual question, but I agree with what Ben's saying. And the fact is that all systems are always going to have gaps. Even things that drastically work really well, like new cancer medications, still have patients die. Really great constructed armor still has gaps in it. It's not a reason to throw out the whole regime. It's just a reason to continue to adapt and strengthen.
Yeah. And I think I could probably just finish off on that question, because I think actually it's not actually generative AI that's going to. It's the human input to start with. You can register a company, like I said, for 12 quid. So once we can combat that part and put places into which they're doing, Companies House are doing, to clean up their act, so I think there's on the process. Unfortunately, the poll hasn't worked, so I can't give you the questions. I'm sure it will come out through the social media. Perhaps we've done that on purpose, so everyone can then keep following all of us and see what the poll actually said. I don't know. Maybe that was it. But anyway, I thank you all. We're about 8 minutes over. Goodness me, I'd be slapping my hand if that was going to school 8 minutes late. So thank you very much, guys, for your input. It's been a warmly welcome, and I wish you most of you, the rest of the day. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the audience for joining.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks.